When you open your medicine cabinet, and pull out a bottle of pills, what do you actually look at?
Oh, usually just the label, right? Like the dosage or the brand.
Exactly. You glance at the label. Maybe you notice the logo of some massive, familiar brand like a Pfizer or an Eli Lilly. And, you trust that corporate name.
Right, because that's the name you know.
Yeah. But the thing is, the real power behind that medicine, like the absolute bottom of the global pharmaceutical supply chain, it isn't sitting in some shiny corporate tower in New York or Switzerland.
No, not at all.
The real power is likely operating out of this 500-acre factory in Vishakhapatnam, India, running 3 shifts a day, quietly manufacturing the actual foundational molecules that the rest of the world completely relies on to stay alive.
It's wild to think about. We are just so entirely conditioned to think of the finished product.
Right.
Like we look at the pill in the bottle and we just completely overlook the vast, complex industrial infrastructure that's required just to create the raw, active ingredients inside it.
And that's exactly what we're getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into an incredibly detailed newsletter article from May 13th, 2026.
Yeah, it's titled DIVI'S, the infrastructure that never gets called infrastructure.
Written by Equity, decoded by Spirit. And our mission today is to decode how DIVI'S Laboratories, this company doing totally unglamorous process chemistry, has quietly made itself an irreplaceable piece of global infrastructure.
It really is a fascinating read because if you approach DIVI'S Laboratories simply as a pharmaceutical company, you are basically guaranteed to misinterpret their value.
Totally. We're going to explore why traditional financial metrics completely fail to capture its actual value and, well, how global geopolitics is actively rewriting the rules of medicine.
Right. To actually understand what is happening in Vishakhapatnam, you have to look at them through an entirely different lens. Because, they do not make finished pills.
Right. They don't do the shiny packaging.
Exactly. They operate across 3 distinct segments. But the foundation of their whole empire is generic, active pharmaceutical ingredients.
Or APIs, right. Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because before we can understand why this company is so valuable to the world, we have to understand the mechanics of what it actually does.
Yeah, that's crucial.
So think of an off-patent molecule like naproxen or gabapentin. The chemical structure of those drugs is public knowledge. Anyone in the world can legally pull the recipe.
Sure, the recipe is out there.
But having the recipe for a complex chemical compound doesn't mean you can just manufacture it. I like to think of it like a bakery, or actually like trying to cook a really delicate, perfect risotto.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Cooking that risotto for 2 people in a small pan in your kitchen, that's manageable. Now imagine trying to cook that exact same risotto in an Olympic-sized swimming pool.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is. And the bottom of the pool is boiling, the top is freezing cold, and you have to stir the whole thing with a literal crane. And if even 1 grain of rice is overcooked or, contaminated, the FDA shuts down your entire operation.
Right, 0 margin for error.
Yeah. Exactly. DIVI'S is the bakery, or the kitchen, that figured out how to cook the swimming pool risotto flawlessly, 1,000,000 times a day, with 0 regulatory flags.
And that relentless consistency over 30 years is how they've captured over 50% of the global market share in several of these foundational molecules.
Over 50%? That's just wild.
It is, because the physics of scaling chemistry is brutal. When you move a reaction from a tiny glass beaker in a lab to a 50,000-liter stainless steel vat, the thermodynamics completely change.
I can imagine.
Heat dissipation becomes a massive engineering problem. Pressure becomes super volatile. If the temperature fluctuates by even a fraction of a degree in one corner of that vat, you don't just get a slightly weaker drug.
Would I happen?
You might synthesize dangerous genotoxic impurities. Mastering that scaling process, that is their actual core intellectual property.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's the generic API segment. What about the rest of the business?
Well, they have a second segment, which is nutraceuticals and carotenoids. So supplying ingredients like vitamin D3 and beta-carotene to the food and dietary supplement industries.
Gotcha, the vitamins.
Right. It provides stable, profitable ballast for the company, but the real leverage, the absolute crown jewel of their portfolio, sits in their third segment.
Which is?
Custom synthesis or contract development and manufacturing, CDMO. That's the reason 12 of the top 20 global pharmaceutical giants trust them implicitly.
Ah, Okay. So this is where they leave the public generic recipes behind.
Exactly. In custom synthesis, these massive pharma giants come to DIVI'S with a brand new, entirely unproven patented molecule.
And DIVI'S becomes their exclusive synthesis partner, right?
Yes. They start by figuring out how to make just a few grams of this new drug for phase I clinical trials.
Which is like the small pan of risotto.
Right. Then, if the drug works, they figure out how to scale it to kilograms for phase 2 and phase 3 trials. And if it actually gets approved, they handle the multi-ton commercial manufacturing for the global launch.
Wow. And the source mentions that this segment makes up roughly 45% of DIVI'S total revenue now.
And it carries substantially higher margins than the generic API business. Because, you are embedding yourself into the life cycle of a patented, high-margin blockbuster drug from the very beginning.
But I want to push back on this model for a second, because if you're listening to this and looking at your portfolio, you might be thinking, if this is essentially just contract manufacturing, shouldn't it be a race to the bottom for the cheapest price?
That's a very common assumption.
Right. Like, if I'm a global pharma giant, once DIVI'S figures out how to make my molecule in bulk, why wouldn't I just take their process to a cheaper factory somewhere else?
Well, that assumes the pharmaceutical supply chain functions like the garment industry, where you can just move a t-shirt pattern to a cheaper loom overnight.
But it doesn't work like that.
Not even close. The pharmaceutical hierarchy is incredibly rigid. At the absolute base, you have key starting materials. Those are chemically converted into drug intermediates. Those intermediates are then heavily processed into the active pharmaceutical ingredient, the API.
So there are multiple massive chemical steps before you even get to the API.
Exactly. And only after all of that chemistry is complete does the API go to a formulation facility to be pressed into a pill and put in a bottle. DIVI'S operates in those deep foundational steps.
And the competitive moat protecting them there isn't just their massive scale. The source points out it's the sheer terror of regulatory switching costs.
Yes, the switching costs are astronomical.
Let's walk through this real-world example from the piece, because this blew my mind. Imagine a large European pharmaceutical company. They are 4 years into a phase 3 clinical trial for a revolutionary new cardiovascular drug.
Right.
They've been using DIVI'S as their API synthesis partner since day one. Every single experimental batch given to a patient came from DIVI'S specific chemical processes.
And by the time that European company files their regulatory dossier with the FDA, that application is physically tied to the DIVI'S facility.
Wait, really? Physically tied?
Yes. The FDA doesn't just approve the molecule itself. They approve the specific facility, the specific VATs, the specific analytical methods, and the exact process parameters used to create it.
See, this is where the mechanics of chemistry get fascinating. You might think a molecule is just a molecule, right? But the FDA knows that even a slight change in, like, the ambient humidity of a factory floor.
Or the specific shape of a mixing blade at a new facility.
Right. A different mixing blade can alter the way a chemical crystal actually forms. And if the crystal structure changes, the resulting pill might dissolve in a patient's esophagus instead of their stomach.
Which completely alters how the drug absorbs into the bloodstream. The FDA simply does not take chances on that.
So if that European pharma company wants to switch to a cheaper supplier just to save a few pennies on the dollar, what happens?
They can't just email the recipe to a cheaper factory. They have to run entirely new comparability studies.
Oh.
Yeah, they have to manufacture new batches at the new facility and prove comprehensively that the new crystal structure and purity profile perfectly match the old one.
And what does that do to their timeline?
It triggers a regulatory hold. You are looking at a delay of anywhere from 18 to 36 months added directly to your program timeline.
18 to 36 months. And in the pharmaceutical world, that isn't just an inconvenience. That is absolute financial devastation.
Exactly.
The newsletter runs the math on this. If a drug is projected to peak at $2 billion in annual sales, a single month of delay costs that innovator company approximately 167 crore in foregone revenue.
167 crore just for 1 month.
Just 1 month. When you stare down the barrel of that math, you realize DIVI'S doesn't even need to hold their clients hostage or aggressively hike prices. They just become structurally indispensable.
Right. Switching is just economically irrational at that point. It's a moat of irreversibility. The gap between knowing the theoretical structure of a molecule on a whiteboard and actually executing a multi-ton synthesis is an enormous chasm.
And DIVI'S has, what, 700 scientists specifically employed to bridge that chasm?
Yep. That deep institutional knowledge of process chemistry is the actual product they are selling, not just the chemicals.
Okay, so if this moat is truly this impenetrable, we have to talk about the valuation, because this is the elephant in the room.
Oh, absolutely. The valuation illusion.
Right. If you open up any stock screener right now in India, Divi's is going to flash bright red as dangerously overvalued.
Every single time.
There is always that resident deep value investor in every WhatsApp group who points to Divi's trailing PE, which is hovering between 64 and 70x, and they scream that it's a bubble. So what does this all mean? Are the screeners wrong?
The short answer is yes. The market screeners are using entirely the wrong lens. Relying on a trailing PE ratio for a custom synthesis business guarantees a distorted view.
Why is that?
Because a trailing PE assumes that revenue is generated in a smooth, linear fashion quarter over quarter, like how a company like Hindustan Unilever sells soap.
Right. People buy soap every week, so the revenue is flat and super predictable.
Exactly. But custom synthesis revenue is entirely milestone-based and project-driven. Clinical trials happen in massive, staggered phases.
So it's not a steady stream of income.
Not at all. When a global innovator finally gets FDA approval and launches a major commercial drug, it triggers a colossal supply demand from Divi's. That creates a massive revenue spike that might only hit in 1 or 2 specific quarters.
And then after that initial global stocking, the demand flattens out to a maintenance level, right, until the next major drug in the pipeline hits its launch milestone.
Precisely. This creates an illusion of massive earnings volatility if you are only looking at a short-term trailing metric.
It's like comparing a consumer goods company to, I don't know, a major port or an airport.
That is the perfect analogy. You wouldn't value an airport based on how many sandwiches they sold last Tuesday. You value the infrastructure. The more accurate lens for a company doing heavy industrial chemistry is return on capital employed, or ROCE.
And the newsletter highlights that despite Divi's massive capital intensity, its ROCE sits at roughly 20.45%.
Which is incredibly impressive.
To ground that number for you listening, Sun Pharma sits right alongside it at around 20.86%. But Sun Pharma is a massive, diversified giant selling branded finished pills directly to consumers.
Right, and Divi's is doing deeply complex upstream chemistry, yet they're delivering basically the exact same quality of capital deployment.
And to fully grasp their valuation, the source says you have to look at their balance sheet under the line item CWIP, Capital Work in Progress.
Yes. As of December 2025, there's 2,394 crore sitting in CW.
2,394 crore. And that isn't just some abstract accounting concept. That represents physical steel in the ground.
Exactly. Massive, half-built lab spaces, empty stainless steel vats, and advanced clean rooms in Vishakhapatnam.
They are sucking up cash today to build, but they won't print a single rupee of revenue until next year or the year after. So that high valuation is really pricing in this future infrastructure coming online.
It mirrors how the market values PI industries. They're an agrochemical CDMO, and they routinely trade at a 70 to 80x PE because the market understands the immense premium of a globally embedded contract manufacturer.
It really is a deliberate strategic choice to stay out of the finished pill business, isn't it? The piece contrasts them with Loris Labs.
Right. Loris is actively moving up the value chain toward finished formulations, but Divi's is refusing the temptation of finished pills to stay completely focused on dominating the chemistry trenches.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because that 70x PE is also pricing in something much larger than just future factory capacity. It is pricing in a massive geopolitical panic.
The macro tailwinds here are just enormous.
Right. Like, sure, healthcare spending is always a safe haven when the broader stock market corrects. People don't stop taking their blood pressure medication just because the market drops. But this goes way beyond that. Can you explain the sudden pivot away from China?
Well, the post-COVID-19 geopolitical awakening fundamentally altered supply chain mathematics.
How so?
For decades, the global equilibrium was ruthlessly optimized for cost. China controlled the foundational raw materials with near absolute dominance. India handled the APIs, and the US and Europe handled the finished formulations.
But the pandemic kind of shattered that illusion of safety.
Completely. It revealed that relying on a single centralized nation for the foundational chemical inputs of global medicine isn't just a slight procurement risk. It is a severe existential vulnerability.
I mean, if one country's ports shut down or if trade relations sour, the entire global medicine cabinet goes empty in a matter of weeks.
Exactly. Innovators are no longer optimizing purely for the cheapest single source. They are actively paying a premium to optimize for redundancy.
And the newsletter gives a perfect roadmap for this shift with Eli Lilly's recent capital allocation. In March 2026, Eli Lilly announced a $3 billion investment in their China operations.
Right.
But simultaneously, in October 2025, they committed over $1 billion to India's manufacturing capacity.
They are explicitly hedging their sovereign risk, and when you require the extreme zero-tolerance quality levels mandated by the U.S. FDA, there are very few credible addresses on the planet that can provide that redundancy at scale.
And DIVI'S is at the very top of that shortlist. Plus, India itself is structurally shifting to capture this. The government rolled out the PLI scheme for bulk drugs.
Yes, the production-linked incentive scheme.
The source notes that 38 of these massive chemical projects have been commissioned, and the results are historic. For the first time in FY25, India's API exports, which hit 41,493 crore, actually surpassed imports, which were sitting at 39,215 crore.
That is a massive turning point. India isn't just acting as a vendor anymore. It is actively constructing an alternative sovereign supply chain.
Sovereign supply chain. That is such a powerful phrase. And the trade tailwinds are backing this up, right?
Oh, absolutely. DIVI'S is perfectly positioned to harvest the benefits of new international trade agreements, like the February 2026 U.S.-India Interim Agreement, which explicitly removed tariffs on generic pharmaceuticals.
And the July 2025 UK CETA deal, too.
Right. Furthermore, because DIVI'S acts as a global toll bridge, they earn their revenue primarily in U.S. dollars and euros, but they consolidate their financials in Indian rupees.
So they get a massive currency bump.
Huge. Through December 2025, they booked a 9-month Forex gain of 121 crore purely from rupee depreciation.
Wow. And we haven't even touched on the biggest gold rush in modern medicine yet, the GLP-1 wave.
The weight loss drugs.
Yeah, the global explosion in weight loss and diabetes drugs. You see the plastic pen injectors everywhere now. But the bottleneck for producing these drugs isn't molding the plastic pen, is it?
No, the absolute bottleneck is synthesizing the raw peptide API. Synthesizing a peptide is infinitely more complex than traditional small molecule chemistry.
Because it's not just mixing stuff in a vat.
Exactly. You are meticulously chaining together specific amino acids in an exact repeating sequence at a massive industrial scale. The global capacity to perform that specific type of synthesis is severely constrained.
And DIVI'S is on the very short list of credible partners capable of scaling these GLP-1 APIs. That alone adds a premium to their valuation that standard models just can't capture.
It really does.
Okay, I have to pump the brakes here for a second. Because right now, this sounds like an invincible fortress. Geopolitical tailwinds, impenetrable regulatory moats, milestone revenue spikes, the biggest drug class in human history driving demand.
It sounds perfect.
Right. But in the markets, there's always a catch. What could actually bring this 500-acre compounding machine down? What are the asymmetric risks we need to look at?
The reality of operating heavily regulated industrial infrastructure is stark, and the risks are deeply asymmetric. Now, the founding family clearly maintains immense conviction. The piece notes their promoter holding remains completely unchanged at 51.88%.
Which is a great sign of confidence.
It is. But the external threats are severe. The single most terrifying risk for a company like this is an FDA import alert.
Oh, man. That is not just a theoretical slap on the wrist, is it?
Not at all. An FDA import alert means nothing from your factory is allowed to cross the U.S. border. Period. This isn't theoretical. An alert in 2019 and 2020 hit DIVI'S, and it instantly erased roughly 40% of their total market capitalization.
40%. Gone instantly.
Yes. A single data integrity issue or a poorly documented clipboard entry during a graveyard shift can trigger a warning letter. One issue shuts off the U.S. market, and your CDMO contracts just evaporate.
That is terrifying. And what about concentration risk?
That's the second major vulnerability. The bulk of their custom synthesis revenue relies on deep relationships with just 12 global innovators.
So they are tethered to the success of their clients' experimental pipelines. If a major phase 3 trial fails or a drug gets withdrawn, the revenue hit to DIVI'S is immediate.
Exactly. There is no generic backup plan for a failed custom molecule.
And then there's the execution risk of their own expansion, right? That 2,394 crore sitting in capital work in progress.
Yes, that infrastructure is a sunk cost today. It absolutely must start generating commercial revenue by FY27 or FY28. If there are delays, the market will brutally reprice the stock's growth trajectory downward.
Because you cannot hold a 70x PE if your new factories are just sitting idle.
Precisely. And finally, we have to talk about China's response.
Right, because the whole bull case relies on innovators pivoting away from Chinese supply chains. But China isn't just going to surrender their dominance.
No, they are actively fighting back. Chinese API manufacturers are aggressively investing in regulatory compliance to close the gap.
Getting certifications and stuff?
Yes, they are systematically securing EU GMP certifications and rigorously pursuing US FDA approvals.
Which requires massive capital, but, well, China has the capital.
Exactly. While Indian manufacturers currently hold an advantage in cost competitiveness and geopolitical trust, that gap is actively narrowing.
So the moat is formidable, but it's not invincible.
Right, it's not a permanent law of physics.
So bringing all of this together, DIVI'S Laboratories isn't just some generic pharma stock to be plotted on a PE chart.
Not at all.
It is this indispensable, deeply embedded toll bridge for the entire global pharmaceutical industry. Protected by trust, incredibly complex chemistry, and the immense financial cost of regulatory switching.
They recognized that the true leverage wasn't in fighting for shelf space with branded pills. It was in doing the brutal, unglamorous work of process chemistry exceptionally well.
So the next time you, or someone you love, takes a cutting-edge medication, I really want you to look at that bottle differently.
It really shifts your perspective.
It does.
Yeah.
Because there is a very good chance that the foundational chemistry that made it possible was quietly, perfectly compounded in 3 shifts in Vishakhapatnam.
It's incredible to think about.
And I'll leave you with this final thought to mull over, kind of building on our geopolitical chat earlier. As these foundational chemical inputs shift from being just simple, easily tradable commodities to matters of literal national strategic sovereignty,
Right.
how long will it be before global governments stop treating these upstream API manufacturers like publicly traded companies and simply start treating them like classified defense assets? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.